soir. Et vous, l'ambassadeur, Vassi, et votre entreprise. Nous continuons en anglais, but that's mostly very comfortable for me. So, Madam Minister, you are the Minister of the French Armed Forces, and it was very interesting to see. We've been following some of your comments, certainly in the run-up to the NATO summit, and this is what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to talk about space, we're going to talk about cyber, we're going to talk about the French and also the Dutch deployment in the Indo-Pacific. But mostly we're also going to talk about cooperation, European cooperation within NATO. These are the topics that we today will deal with. When I read the Wikipedia on you, it was interesting to see that it didn't only mention that you're a politician, you were a civil servant, but you're also an entrepreneur. And I think this is one of the best English words there is, entrepreneur. I think George W. Bush once said, the French, they don't even have a word for entrepreneur. Which of course, interesting. You are an ENA graduate, but you were also at the Institut de Politique, and we can shake hands on that. I was there for only 2 weeks, unfortunately. We know that you were in the executive committee of Air France. You were in charge of French railroads. You are a member of the Parti Socialiste. We're not going to talk too much about politics, but if you want, that's also possible with me, because I'm very interested to know how you look upon the French elections in April next year. You took a very strong line towards the petition that was handed over to you by the French generals. And what I noted is that before the Biden trip, of which the NATO summit was part of, you said that you were worried that the renewed transatlantic love fest would slow or halt Europeans' awakening. You said, I think it was in Politico, in the Euro-Atlantic relationship there is a constant, which is that the Europeans must handle more of their security themselves. Now this is the debate we're going to have with you today. But you want to maybe start off with a short introduction yourself.
Well, thank you very much for your invitation. As you said, we had a very dense agenda at international level, and we had a very expected meeting in NATO. I mean expected because we expected that for quite a long time. Meeting with the new American administration was something we needed to have. And it's not a secret to say that due to the virus, travels are more difficult for the time being. So creating a relationship with a new administration is not that easy when you have to use the phone or the video conference. So it was the first time, at least for me, I know that my dear colleague, the foreign ministers had the opportunity to meet with his counterpart Blinken, but for me it was the first time I had a real interaction with my American counterpart, and of course above all we all waited for the first statement coming from the Biden president. So I think that the US-EU relationship needed to be strengthened, and I'm sure that this NATO summit created a new dynamic. We had experienced a 4-year term with Mr. Trump as a US president. The NATO summit were extremely difficult. I can say that. I'm sure I will not be denied by anyone. So Mr. Trump makes the dialogue within NATO extremely difficult. And so we wanted to have the first signal coming from the US that the transatlantic relationship was important to them, even if we know that there is a switch that has been initiated by President Obama to Asia. So we have to take into account that the United States are now very focused, even more now than 2 years or 4 years or 6 years ago, on Asia and China. We all know that NATO is a cornerstone of the European security, and it has not changed. Mm-hmm. So the conclusion of that is that we have to take care more of our own security. And that's why there is a discussion which is not always fluid between allies and EU members, mm-hmm. and most of them are both 21 of NATO allies are also EU members. There is a discussion just to make sure that there will be no discrepancies or no replications, and that all the efforts made by the EU members will be useful and relevant to the NATO alliance. And to me, it's extremely clear. And what I do not understand is why we spend so much time discussing this potential contradiction mm-hmm. or competition between NATO on the one hand and EU on the other hand. All the efforts made by the EU members for their own national defense is something which is useful for NATO. And that's why it is so important that European member states keep on investing in their own national defense. And we had also a discussion around that during the NATO summit, because there was a temptation to try to avoid the discussion around the national defense budgets and to focus more on the common fundings, NATO common fundings. But we need both. Yeah. And if I had to choose or to set priorities, I would say that national investments are probably number one, because it is the addition of national efforts that make Europe's resilience and ability to protect its citizens. So I have no doubt that by investing in our own defense budgets, we support and develop our ability as NATO members. And it's interesting to see that a country such as the Netherlands, which is a very powerful economy, which has the willingness to take its part in European security more and more, and I can testify that along those 4 years, the Netherlands have been very involved in all the European defense discussions, and that the Netherlands are getting more and more on the ground. Yes. So there is no doubt about that. So the question is, are you at the right level in terms of investment in defense and security? Given your ability to act as a military power, mm-hmm. I think this is a good question that deserves to be discussed again, as well in the bilateral way, but also at the European level.
Right. Let's immediately take this, because before we dive into what is the right amount of cash or contributions or capabilities, the 3 C's that everybody seems to be talking about, I think it was you who said in an interview with Le Figaro on the Trump administration that it was a brutal discourse that sometimes happened between us and the Americans, but at the same time this brutal discourse on spending also expressed a reality, and the reality was we need to spend more. Now the Dutch have I think we have about 11 billion euros, that's what we yearly spend. The French, somewhere in the order of 40 billion euros, and I think it has been growing since 2018 with 1.8, 1.7 billion a year. So these are tremendous figures. Now, after Brexit, France is, of course, the big hitter in NATO, but also on the European side. You are the only member state that has a UN Security Council seat. You are the only ones who have nuclear weapons. And you seem to be the only one in the bloc on our side that is capable of deploying a substantial amount of conventional forces around the world. And we're going to address that later. Would you say that you actually adhere to the old pillar idea that once, I think, was brought into existence by John F. Kennedy, an American president, who said at the time that Europe and the United States and Canada should share the same burden. In those days it was 50-50, maybe we should grow back to that. Is that what you're saying? That more spending by European partners actually strengthens NATO?
Yes. I think we started with money, which is not probably the right approach.
We'll get to nicer topics later. We'll deal with the money first. You are in a country where we like to talk about money first.
I know. I have experienced that before. But I think that we should start with the environment, of course.
Yes.
And the environment has not improved from a security perspective. So we have to take into account that threats are increasing on the one hand, and that in the transatlantic relationship, our major partner, which is the United States, are more and more focused in a different area, which is Asia.
Yes.
So the combination of the two should lead us as Europeans to invest more if we want to protect ourselves. So I'm not sure that there is a right level. What I'm sure is that we should do more. Up to, I don't know, but the Allies decided a few years ago to set a target, which is a spending target, which is 2% GDP. So, first of all, let's try to stick to this target, and then we will see if our armed forces are rightly designed, shaped, capable to face the threats we are confronted with.
Very good. What we did, Madame la Ministre, is that we asked some of our colleagues, our analysts, to present you with a little pitch. And the first pitch I would like to show you is by Paul van Hoofd, and he will argue in which areas this idea that was first launched, I think, from Paris, from your country, on European strategic sovereignty, and where it is that we can actually work together. Can I ask for the first pitch? We'll see it here.
The United States has been fundamental to European security and prosperity for over 7 decades.
Ich bin ein Berliner.
However, we're seeing more and more limits to US power. The United States is increasingly preoccupied with developments in the Indo-Pacific. At the same time, improvements in missiles, sensors, and computing capabilities have made military forces more and more vulnerable. The US Navy is overstretched. US leaders are distracted by domestic events. The United States cannot be everywhere at once, yet Europe's collective defense and deterrence depend on it. After all, Europe is no longer as secure as it was when the Cold War ended. To maintain a healthy transatlantic relationship, Europeans need to take a more proactive role. They cannot sit and wait, no longer. At the Hague Center for Strategic Studies, we look at how Europeans can more effectively build a defense identity within the transatlantic relationship. Europeans must not only invest in defense, They must also increase interoperability and streamline the abundance of weapon platforms in Europe. That presents hard questions regarding national defense industries. Europe is in part already taking such steps through the European Defence Fund and the permanent structured cooperation. For example, the Twister project would improve defences against missiles and other weapons. We need more creative combinations of European capabilities. For example, with its air defense frigates, the Netherlands is also contributing to Europe's and NATO's warning against incoming threats, whether air or missile threats. In sum, taking responsibility and more effectively distributing the burdens between the United States and Europe by increasing Europe's capability to protect itself is essential to maintaining the transatlantic relationship in the 21st century.
As you can hear, Paul is actually arguing that there's limits to US power. Basically, they're overstretched also in the domain of naval forces. We can already see that in our own European vicinity. What are the areas, according to you, according to France, in which European partners can strengthen their cooperation, would you say?
First of all, I think that we need to be more and more on the ground together, operating together, and we have to develop our own interoperability, yes, which is, of course, the role of NATO, and NATO does well in this area. But we have also to take care about the technological developments. And we see that if we do not pay attention to the development of technologies such as the ones included in the air fighter F-35, yeah, then there is a risk that our ability to interoperate goes lower and lower, and we definitely need to preserve this interoperability. So I think behind there is a question about our industry, defense industry. We know that these defense industries are split, probably too small compared to their major competitors in the world. And so the European Union is probably the right place to develop more together new technologies and to create industries able to compete with major competitors. So I think that the European Union developed right initiatives in order to support European efforts, I mean member states' effort to develop together new programs linked to the most relevant technologies. For instance, we are launching a major program for a new fighter, European fighter program.
To say, how is this relating to the new fighter jet? Because you know, this country chose F-35. And
yes,
unfortunately,
that's it.
Malheureusement.
Malheureusement.
Yeah.
But it is the sovereignty of the Netherlands which, yes, was at stake, so I will not comment on that. But for sure, we have to be able, as Europeans, to deal with the interconnectivity, exactly, and the fight, the interconnected fight. I don't know if this is a right expression in English, but for sure, vehicles from the army or aircraft, fighters, UAVs, ships now must share more and more data, and they have to share that in real time.
Yes.
So if we miss this very important step, then we will be disqualified in the worldwide competition. So I think that we have to be able to operate together as we do, for instance, in Sahel more and more. And at the same time, be able to develop the right industrial and technological programs that will qualify the Europeans and their industries to compete in a worldwide competition.
Yeah. Paul was arguing in the pitch that hard questions need to be answered, also from a perspective of national defense industries. Now, here in the Netherlands, we have Thales, L-Smart radar was already mentioned, we have Airbus. You have a really large aerospace industry. Many of the European partners would perhaps argue that one of the reasons for the reluctance is that they feel that this European policy will actually only benefit your industry. And here you get to the old problem again, how to make Europe work, make Europe connect. I mean, you can say that you want interoperability, but how are we going to do that?
I think that we have identified new tools to start solving this potential problem, which is my view is not real, it's a fear. Yeah. And I can understand that there is a fear somewhere.
So we fear too much here. Yeah.
But I think that we need to develop a European defense industry, and the initiatives taken by the European Union, such as the PESCO policy, and on top of that the European Defence Fund, are the right tools to develop cooperation between small, medium, and medium-sized industries, and not only at the benefit of the major defense groups. So yes, it is necessary to have European fundings only if there are a sufficient number of countries involved, and these are the key conditions set by the European Commission. And I think it was the condition for a political acceptance of the EU members for this policy. So yes, France has a powerful aircraft industry, but we need to build up a European defense industry strong enough to address all the technological niche that we need at European level.
Yeah. Before you take a question from the audience, I would like to end off this little part with one more question on what we're trying to do here at AHCSS is that we're trying to see whether we can find more creative contributions or combinations of capacities between European countries. That could, for example, be on frigates with the L-Smart, external border control. Would you be open, is your visit to the Netherlands partly also to be understood in that light, to find more creative combinations of capacities and work together?
Well, the Netherlands is probably one of the most supportive country to the European initiatives that have been taken along those years. I will never thank enough my colleague Ank, who was the first one to suggest that the EI2 European Defense Initiative, she suggested to host the first meeting of this European initiative. And I saw it as a real commitment from the Netherlands to be more involved in the European defense security. And since then, we have developed a good relationship and a good connection. She introduced me to the EATC, which is based in Eindhoven, which is a great initiative taken by Europe, which is not known enough and wide.
Also not in the Netherlands, I mean. The European Air Transport Command.
Yes, and it deserves to be known because it's a very efficient tool, which gives a right indication of the direction we should develop, because we can buy equipments and then pool them in the same organization with the right to use it if we need to use them.
It's good to know, and we'll pass on the message to the mayor of Eindhoven that they are an example to European Defence Cooperation. Maybe there's a question from the audience.
Definitely.
Yes. Is there a question from the audience? Lotje, can I ask you to, you need to have, there's a walking mic. Somebody.
Should I?
Yeah, maybe you come over and then. For those of you at home who can't see Lotje, she's one of our best analysts, and she's going to ask the first question. Lotje, the floor is yours.
That's a very nice introduction. Bonjour, Madame la Ministre. I'm very happy that we're talking about European cooperation at the industry level, but obviously it is about a common strategy and political ends as well. Last week has shown that there are still some problems in this regard, forging a common posture, and I wanted to ask you, are we doing enough at the moment to have everyone on board to align Eastern and Western and Northern and Southern views and perspectives at EU level? Thank you.
Is everybody aligned?
Are we doing enough?
Well, I would say that it is improving.
Yeah.
It is improving. There is more and more a sense of the need to be more aligned. And probably the reason is that since 2014-15, most of European countries have been attacked, have suffered from terrorist attacks. And we felt very weak in that regard. So the European Union started thinking about developing a European defense policy from that moment. And from step by step, there is more and more a sense that, of course, Europe may be threatened on the eastern flank, but there is also a major risk on the southern flank. And it is a good example of how EU and NATO can combine their thinkings. NATO is very much focused on the eastern flank. Yeah. This is historical and it remains very relevant. EU considers more and more the southern flank of Europe. And we operate, for instance, in the Sahel with European countries. And those European countries can be Eastern Europe countries. And the reason why they are there in the Sahel, in the field, able to put the lives of their soldiers at stake, is because they first understand that there is a risk for European security, and there is also a need for solidarity between EU members. And when, for instance, France is very present in the Sahel, France is also contributing to the enhanced forward presence in Estonia, and it's quite a long time that we do so. So this need for more solidarity between countries which are more exposed to the Eastern threat and from countries which probably are more sensitive to what's going on in the southern part of Europe and in the Mediterranean Sea, or even more south in Africa, I think is improving quite significantly in Europe right now.
Right. Well, thank you, and thank you, Lotje Boswinkel, for asking this question. I would like now to venture into another domain that also in the NATO summit was addressed again, and is addressed over and over again, and we see that that is becoming more and more present in the, basically in what we fear, which is the hybrid warfare. Mm-hmm. We've seen ransomware, of course, in the US. We've seen malicious cyber attacks. France has endured back in 2015 already with TV5. So all of us have now seen the detrimental effects of cyber warfare just below the threshold of military confrontation. And would like to ask for the second pitch to be called. Luc Vaassen, who's in the audience, has brought this pitch to you. Let's listen to him for a minute.
Conflict between states has taken on a new, more hybrid form, in which cyber operations play an important role. Following the recent wave of ransomware attacks, like the one against Colonial Pipeline, halting half of the transport fuels for the east coast of the US, NATO member states are increasingly concerned about malicious cyber activities, especially from Russia and China. Cybersecurity has become Chefsache, and NATO members are finding ways to deter aggressors through resilience, norms, and response. They have boosted their cybersecurity resilience through national EU or NATO initiatives. At the summit, the importance of norms to enhance stability and reduce risk of conflict was reaffirmed. Now, these should not only include the norms agreed within the UN, but also the principles of the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace, which took on most of the norm proposals of the Global Commission on Stability of Cyberspace, an HCSS initiative supported by the French government. To advance those shared commitments, HCSS also co-chairs one of the Paris Call working groups on the Cyber Stability Index. And then finally, in terms of response, allies reaffirmed Article 5's collective defense to cyber attacks and their willingness to collectively impose costs on transgressors. Now, cyber operations often occur below the threshold of an armed attack, circumventing norms and rules to minimize the basis for decisive response. Allies therefore still face challenges in effectively dissuading malicious actors. France and the Netherlands share the same commitment to the international rules-based order and have publicly declared that they have offensive cyber capabilities. So how can they work together to address this challenge and integrate their own sovereign cyber effects into NATO's operations and collective defense?
As Luc was arguing, we just saw your Foreign Minister Le Drian and our then Foreign Minister Stef Blok launching the report that's actually here in my hands. I will give it to you, and I think everybody in the audience will have one copy. It's the Global Commission on Stability of Cyberspace. Basically, we both adhere to a rules-based world. That is what we all strive for. The Netherlands has done so basically since Hugo Grotius. But we need a new Hugo Grotius. We need a new Hugo Grotius for cyberspace. What is the role of a Ministry of Defense in pursuing that goal? Because the Netherlands is now taking their first steps in this domain. France has a lot of experience already. What would you say to your Dutch colleague when you meet her tonight, or I presume that will happen in these days during your visit? What would your advice to her be?
Well, I think that this is probably one of the major threats we are confronted with, and it's not an easy one to tackle, because as you said, it's just below the threshold, and it is the combination of few facts which at the end create a major systemic threat. So we can see that the players in that domain are testing us. Yeah. They are testing us by attacking an IT hospital system, and step by step they will probably attack even more vital organizations or systems. So I think that there is absolutely no borders for cyber attacks. So cooperation is absolutely key. We have to cooperate not only because we need to cooperate in the answer, but also because the protection we need to improve must be seen, I would say, before they are used. An example, the Americans have been attacked severely. The software was at stake. And who builds the software? Companies. So you need to convince an ecosystem that protection is absolutely key. So you cannot deal with cyber attacks only by reacting. You have to take into account from scratch when you create a software that this software can be attacked. And that's why we need to build up a kind of end-to-end system. Another example, when an aircraft company such as Dassault design a fighter, this aircraft company communicates with the French state, with the defense ministry. There are exchange of data. Engineers discuss. And the day the data comes from the defense ministry to the company, then you don't know what happens. And you don't know what the company does with all the providers it works with. So you need to have a kind of continuous security in your IT systems.
Throughout the ecosystem even. So
throughout the ecosystem. So you have,
partners,
of course, to protect your own IT system as a defense ministry.
Obviously.
But you have also to take care of the security that your providers, that the industries invest in or not. And so the cooperation that is needed does not concern only the states, but also all the economic players, companies, which provides systems, softwares, and so on. So cooperation is absolutely key, and norms were mentioned.
Yeah.
I think that we have also to work on norms. So it's a very good topic that must be discussed on a multilateral basis, and there are various environments to do so. The UN is a right one, NATO is also a right one, EU is also a right one, and we have to make sure that when EU member is attacked, and it had happened in the Netherlands. I remember very well when Ank Bijveld mentioned during a NATO session that the OPCW had been attacked.
Yes.
And she said that Russia was probably the origin of this attack. So I remember that very well, because it was probably the first time that we had this kind of statement during a NATO session. So we have to deal with that collectively.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, France traditionally uses the word deterrence, or being on time. So you said prior to an attack, you already need to be out there. You need to have your ecosystem fully checked. Now, France traditionally uses the word deterrence only in a nuclear setting. Mm-hmm. So basically what I hear you say now is that this also is applicable to the realm of cyber.
Well, I'm not sure that France uses deterrence only as nuclear deterrence. But France is very sensitive on the way the others use the word deterrence, which is rarely related to nuclear deterrence. And that's also something. No, but that's true.
Maybe that is we should put the nuclear option on the table later. Yeah.
But so yes, we definitely need deterrence in the cyberspace domain as well.
Maybe I can introduce one more sphere, one more theater, which is of course the theater of space. Can I call for the next pitch, please? This is a pitch by Patrick Bolder. He's an Air Force commander, and let's listen to him for a moment.
Russian close proximity operations by the spy satellites Cosmos 2542 series, acting like Matryoshka dolls, is just an indicator of increasing tension and competition in the space domain. After declaring space a military domain by NATO in December 2019, and making space also subject to Article 5 mutual defense at the latest NATO summit, new impetus for the space domain is warranted. And anyhow, for any military operation, space domain indispensable. The US Space Force is no isolated case anymore, with the UK and France stepping up their responsibilities. The French Armée de l'Air et de l'Espace is an important step and can be seen as an example for Dutch military space activities. This month, the first Netherlands military satellite, the BRIC-2, will be launched, and the space policy is needed much. In the face of European military cooperation, our two countries could very well learn from each other and cooperate and accelerate their knowledge and increase their capabilities.
In space, yet another of these domains that we should cooperate. We are taking our first steps there. Here we can also probably benefit from your insights. So what can you share with us in terms of more European cooperation in space, and what can the Netherlands contribute?
Well, first of all, I think that now everyone considers that space is a domain for confrontation.
Yes.
This is very new. We used to consider that space was an area for development, new technologies, and the sake of the Earth and its citizens. We've seen a lot of aggressive behaviors in space in the recent years. And that's why France developed a new approach, creating a space command, creating or adding to the domain of the Air Force space as well. And we consider now that we have to be able to protect our own satellites, because our military operations, as it was said, rely more and more on the satellites to communicate, to geolocation. Yeah. Also to listen to the communications and the electromagnetic systems.
Exactly.
So we need, even as in the Sahel, we need to have satellite communications. So the day the satellites stop, I would not say that we will be in difficult times, because we train our soldiers to keep the ancient habits and way of doing, but it will be more difficult. So we have to protect our satellite and space assets, and potentially we will have also to be able to react. And we elaborate defense space policy, and we made a statement which is not a small one. We said we put ourselves in a position to protect our assets, but we also declare that we use the cyber, we mentioned the cyber, as a tool, a military tool in an offensive way, complementary to the operations.
Okay.
And we prepare ourselves to be ready to react also in space. So we have to again develop technologies, and space was from the beginning a very European policy from a civil perspective, of course. But I think that more and more countries now are thinking about having also a military dimension to this space policy. So this is something we would like to work at. Yeah. And we have a lot of European cooperations in terms of space. You mentioned companies such as Thales Airbus, and Airbus are developing their technologies in the space area. Yeah. There are worldwide champions in that area, so, which is good for Europe, of course. So we have to go further.
I would like to bring in Bart Groothuis. Bart, the audience probably already knows you, all the audience at home. They can't see you, but Bart is one of our freshest members of the European Parliament still. Are you still fresh? I hope so, even at the end of the day, I would say. When we're speaking about cyber and also space, Bart, I know you have your own worries about European cooperation in that area. Maybe you would like to shed some light on that, and please also try and end with a question.
Yes, I'll end with a question, Han.
As a member of European Parliament, you should be able to do that within 2 minutes, I guess.
Oh, less. I could try in French, but I will try. And let me start by the question. The question I have is: in 2014, we were in Wales with each other, looking each other in the eye. What is the current threat landscape, and what should we be addressing it in money terms? What we started out with, and we said 2%. That what we should spend all, and all should spend that, including the Netherlands. I'm telling my own government, but that's a good agreement. Now we're in 2021, and I have a new idea. Why don't we come up with a new agreement, a new Wales agreement that deals with new threats? There's an additional threat to the 2014 landscape. Is it not time, is my question, that we come together as an international community and say, we need a new expenditure agreement within NATO, perhaps within the EU, and perhaps both, to say we commit ourselves in capabilities, in personnel, address to new hybrid threats, to counter-propaganda, counter-intelligence, counter-espionage. Shouldn't we address that, counter-disinformation? Shouldn't we address it in that way? And above all, I'd like to very much welcome all the things that you're doing inside the European Union. I'm really looking forward to the French presidency. And as rapporteur on the new Europe's cybersecurity legislation, the NIS2, I'm very much looking forward to make this the best legislation that we've ever seen to address these hybrid threats as well. But that's a different chapter. But thank you very much for coming.
So, as a good politician, he's immediately using the floor to putting out a new idea, obviously. Sure. So this is the new Wales agreement. We will call it the Kneuterdijk agreement. But what about this idea of committing to capacities, cash, and perhaps even personnel on space deterrence or space initiatives and cyber deterrence?
Probably you will find me a bit cautious because as Defense Minister or Armed Forces Minister, I have to deal with mainly the Finance Minister, as all defense ministers in the world.
And you had some preparation because you were at the budget, responsible for budget as well.
Yes, and I hope that this is an asset in my new responsibility. But I think that, especially in these difficult times, we had the virus crisis, or we have the virus crisis. I'm sure that in the coming months and years there will be political discussions around the right budget allocations. And I'm not sure that it will be easy to start right now a discussion on a more ambitious target, as all allies have not yet reached the current target, which is 2%. So I'm not sure that the discussion must be raised in terms of level of effort. There is room for improvement, for sure, but for sure a discussion is needed on what are the priorities in terms of investment. We are used to invest in conventional equipments. France invests a lot in its nuclear deterrence, but now we have new fields for investment, which are the ones you mentioned. Cyber, which is probably not as expensive as what we talked about before. A fighter or a SCAF program is probably much more expensive than the means to improve our cyber defense. But we need qualification, we need competences, we need people that are well trained to these new expertise. And that is probably something we have not looked at enough. I don't know how it works in the Netherlands, but in France, the educational system, universities, schools, do not deliver in terms of volume, quantity, but also quality, the competences needed to invest properly in that domain. So I think that our effort should be more seen as a national or a European effort, however you see it. But it's not only a question of defense. It is a question of survival for our countries. So the educational system must take more into account the need for developing the right skills and the right level of expertise in order to fulfill all the positions that are empty today in companies, but also in our cyber command at the Defense Ministry, and so on and so on. So this is really an issue for all the governments, and not only for defense ministers.
It's very interesting that you actually bring up education as well. And obviously this also has to do with the amount of competition that we face these days, that, for example, comes from Asia. And this brings us to our last talking point, which is Southeast Asia and the combined efforts that we now undertake in order to preserve freedom of navigation. So maybe I can ask for, again, Paul van Hoofd for his last pitch, and maybe we can listen to this.
After centuries, the center of gravity in global politics is shifting back to the Indo-Pacific from the Euro-Atlantic. With that shift, new challenges are presenting themselves, and the chances of confrontation are growing. The openness of the Indo-Pacific and the rule of law therein are of crucial importance to Europe. Oceans are the global economy's arteries, and the costs of their closure are enormous, especially for a country like the Netherlands. European states are recognizing the Indo-Pacific's importance. They are increasingly engaging with South, Southeast, and East Asian partners. France, Germany, and the Netherlands have put out new Indo-Pacific strategies, as has the European Union itself. It's also a prominent theme in the latest British Defence Review. However, European naval capabilities are still limited for now, and their cohesion is strategically underdeveloped. Therefore, at the Hague Center for Strategic Studies, we look at how we can more effectively combine European assets to ensure a stable and sustained naval presence in the region, and to make clear how much we value, as Europeans, a free and open Indo-Pacific. We look at which partners are like-minded and which are strategically indispensable. We also consider the additional tools of influence that European states can wield, such as the participation in the International Maritime Organization, the Comité Maritime International, and others to strengthen the existing order. To sum up, at the Hague Center, we're working out how Europeans can contribute to guarding the maritime commons, and how they can contribute to decreasing the chances of confrontation in the Indo-Pacific. This is not just a matter of articulating policy ideas, but also of building networks. from Europe to Asia, and in order to strengthen these institutions and to strengthen political trust.
I don't want to bring up Hugo Grotius too many times, but again, the Mare Liberum still seems to be on our minds. It's still necessary to keep open the arteries of world trade. You have an operation going on called Clemenceau 21. We're actually contributing to the freedom of navigation naval exercises with our Everton, a small frigate that we deploy. What can you say on these matters? I mean, we've now already experienced the cooperation in the Gulf, in the land forces in Mali. Of course, we worked together on Barkhane, although that was a different operation. Is this the renewal of some new love affair between our two nations, or is this simply the way forward that we anticipate if we talk about European defense cooperation?
I think that the freedom of navigation must be preserved, and freedom of navigation is at stake, more and more at stake in the Indo-Pacific and especially in the South China Sea. So if we believe, and that's France's case, if we believe in multilateralism, we need to protect the values we believe in. And we don't do it in an aggressive way. We just want to show that these values deserve to be protected. So sailing through international waters is a right. By sailing in international waters with military ships, we send a signal that we are ready to protect as well commercial navigation, which is key for our economies. We rely very much on maritime traffic, and the Netherlands probably more than others. And so we send a signal. But Indo-Pacific is very far from Europe. And we are overstretched with probably navies which are smaller than the US Navy. So it is of the utmost importance that we can coordinate our national efforts to send a coordinated message to the power, the major power, which tries to test the lines with us. So sending a ship is a good signal, but neither France nor the Netherlands can have permanently a ship in this area. That's why having a Dutch ship, then a German ship, then a French ship in this part of the world is very important. And we want also to know more about the behaviors of China in the area. And what do we see? We see first that the China Navy is growing very fast.
Very fast, yeah.
So I think that each year it is growing the size of the Dutch Navy.
Well,
exactly.
There you go.
So it just to give you a sense of the speed and the scale of the growth. And more than that, we have to understand the way they use their military assets. And what we should fear more is their low ability to escalate. And having a China with very powerful equipments, but not knowing the escalation grammar or language is something which is very worrying. So we have to not to be in contact in terms of military contact, but we have to be able to observe how they use their military equipments. So I think that it is extremely relevant that as Europeans we shape an Indo-Pacific strategy, including what we could do in the maritime domain, because sea is a common good, and we have to protect sea. We do it. You mentioned it in the Gulf,
Yes.
and we should be able to do it in the Far East, which is much more demanding.
Absolutely. We're running out of time almost. It would, I think, not be right if we talk about European cooperation and leave out one of our biggest friends. So here's a message from a friend.
Lieber Han, danke dir sehr. Madame la Ministre, chers collègues et ami Ambassadeur Louis Vassy. I would have loved to be with you, but as my time is coming to a close here in The Hague, I'm busily traveling through different areas, so I will do that virtually. I'm very happy that we have this occasion here today. You know, we work as Germany a lot with the Dutch. We are basically integrating our armed forces. We also work a lot with the French. You work here between the two, and it's always good in European security and defense when people work together in different combinations with different strengths. And we have had also a lot of a debate in the last years about the role of European security defense for itself, but also within NATO, naturally. When I started as a young diplomat, that was a very hot debate. But now, many years later, I can see that this debate has become more normal, more rational. And also the Americans have made demands that the Europeans are better capable of doing stuff on their own when it comes to their security. So in this sense, the debate we are now having both within the EU and in NATO, but also between the two, is a debate which brings us forward. I think we have made progress, still more needs to be done, but yes, we have done some progress that the Europeans have more of, I think Han likes to call it strategic sovereignty, and that we are doing better here. And I wish you a very fruitful discussion. And again, I would have loved to come in person, but that was not possible. Thank you for your attention.
Dirk Bengelman is the German ambassador, and we have noticed that he operates almost simultaneously and jointly like a Siamese twin with your ambassador. So I thought it would be only right to bring him on. But isn't the best message that the Germans are sort of losing their reluctance to participate and join in common defense operations, whether they are in European of Europäischen Ebene, as they would say, but also within NATO. Isn't that the best and most positive message that we can finalize this discussion between the two?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is a very, very positive trend which is developing right now. I hope that the pressure that the Trump administration put on Germany will turn into something more positive, because Germany was pushed bluntly, I would say, in this direction. And to me, what is interesting is that Germany is committed to keep on with this its own investment in defense and security. So it is not easy for them, because they have constraints, they have limitations in the way they can cooperate, especially when it comes to operations. But I'm sure that they are strongly committed to make the new military programs happen.
Yes.
So that's a very, very good signal, and that's a link between various countries. Germany is closer to the eastern flank, I mentioned, but is also involved and committed on the southern flank.
Thank you very much. Just one last question that I simply have to answer. Will Germany or France play Netherlands in the final of the European Championship?
I have absolutely no clue about football. And my experience in a French-Dutch group told me that it is very dangerous to make any forecast in terms of when it is about football. And I remember that one previous KLM CEO was a football player in the Ajax team. So I'm very cautious about football forecast.
You will probably sit tonight in a Dutch-French group, and I hope you will feel safe. Thank you very much, Florence Parly. Thank you very much, Madame la Ministre, for being here on a Friday night.
Thank you for your invitation.
And thank you for watching this live stream, and hope you will meet us again on our next one. Thank you so much.